Thanks for joining me today. This is the second video that I'm doing on New Zealand landscape photography. The first video was on photographing the Waikato tree. Today's video is about photographing the Gates of Haast Cascades. Arthur's Pass is part of a national park and it covers a very wide area. It is a very steep area covered in snow-capped mountains, and I would rate it as one of the best scenic drives that we did in our 10-day trip while we were traveling through the South Island of New Zealand. The landscape changed constantly, and you can see that I'm all set up. I've got my Origin Travel Plus tripod, the Cascades are behind me, and they're powering away. This area does get a lot of rain, but at the time that we were there, it wasn't raining. The water that was just powering down here comes from the snow-capped mountains all around this area. And the more water that comes in, the faster the cascades run. Today I want to show you how I photographed this cascades and also how I took long exposures and show you that there isn't a perfect setting for long exposures when you're photographing cascades or a waterfall like this, because one, it depends on the amount of light that you have. Two, it depends on how fast the water is flowing. And lastly, it also depends on the formation of the cascade or the waterfall. Here in these cascades, there was a lot of big rocks and there were some rocks protruding in the center of the cascades. So trying to get the perfect exposure was very hard. And I'm going to show you 5 photos with different exposures to show you that sometimes you can get lucky, but don't just take one photo when you've got your settings. Take multiple photos. Remember, the water is flowing quite quickly, so one photo might look, you can say like, oh, okay, well, it doesn't look that nice. I found to get a very nice long exposure at a certain setting that I like is I take multiple photos. I might take 3, 5 or 6 continuously, just pressing that shutter button. I use a 1-second delay, so I make sure that there's no shake on the camera, but taking multiple photos, the water flowing will be very different. And when you get home, you can look at all your photos and go like, oh yes, this one looks great. The water is just flowing perfectly like over this rock. Do that for all the settings that you try. I've seen people say like, well, tell me the perfect exposure for long exposures. Well, there is no perfect exposure. It depends on the day. It depends on how much light and all that. So here is how I took these photos. The first photo you see here, I wasn't using any ND filter. I just had a polarizer on. And most people that follow my channel will know that I am a Fotopro ambassador, and the gear that I use is from Fotopro. On this trip, I used extensively the Fotopro X-95 rotator instead of an L bracket. An L bracket means that when your camera is bolted like this in landscape, you want to turn it to portrait, you've got to take the camera off the tripod, put it in portrait, and then you go, well, I'd like to take more landscapes. So it's taking the camera off the tripod and putting it back in. My camera is in landscape orientation, but there's a little lever on the side here. I can quickly turn. There, I'm in portrait orientation. If I feel that I want another photo in landscape, I can just turn it around, bring it back to landscape. Remember when you're out photographing landscapes that sometimes you're so crowded in your mind that you say like, yeah, it'll look great in landscape. Don't forget to take one in portrait orientation, because the two orientations are so different that when you get home, you might look and go like, well, I thought the landscape orientation was best, but I'm glad I took the portrait. So here are the 5 exposures here, with different shutter speeds and different apertures and different ISO. This is the first photo here, taken at 32 mils, 1/13 of a second, f11, ISO 100. The second photo here is 1/6 of a second, f11, but ISO 50. I'm getting a slightly longer exposure. Now look at this one. These are the same settings as the image before. Look at the water flowing in the cascade there, where the arrow is pointing, compared to the first photo. Can you see what I was meaning about taking multiple photos? If I'd just taken one photo, the second photo here really has more definition in the water. Still at just 1/6 of a second. This is why I say like, take multiple photos at the same exposure. Even if you keep changing your exposure, take multiple photos, and when you get home, just choose the best one. And before I show you the last two photos, on all these photos, I was using a CPL filter. When you're photographing cascades, waterfalls, or you're at the beach, you really need a polarizer, because what a polarizer does is just cuts out the glare. These photos were taken at around 11 o'clock, just before lunchtime, and there was so much glare on the water that if I hadn't put the polarizer on there, I would have gotten all that glare. I wouldn't have seen the detail in the water. Now here's the last two photos. This one taken at 2 seconds, f8 ISO 100, and I had a 6-stop ND filter on. The first two photos, I only had a 3-stop ND filter. So these two were taken with a CPL filter and the 6-stop case ND filter. 2 seconds, f8 ISO 100. This next one here, 5 seconds, f11 ISO 100. And I believe this one here is better at f8 at 2 seconds, because look at the last one here. We have lost definition in the water, because when the water flows around rocks or flows over rocks, you want to see some definition. You don't want just to see like baby smooth water, because it's not realistic. What you see here doesn't tell the whole story of these cascades. So I quickly put my camera in portrait orientation and took 2 panoramas, because I wanted to show my viewers around these cascades and also the mountain in the background. So these are the 6 images that I shot for this panorama that you will see. And I overlapped them by about a third. Using the LCD screen on the back, because I had a 1 second delay, I was able to just touch it. I'd set the camera up, lock the autofocus. This is another point, when you're taking panoramas like this, make sure that once you've focused the camera, put it into manual focus, whether on the lens or in the camera, so that your focusing point doesn't move. Because if your focusing point moves, it will show up in your panorama. Now, these are the photos, 42mm, 1/60th of a second, f8, ISO 50. Here is the first stitch of this panorama here. We can see all the rocks on the side of the cascades here. But pay attention to the left-hand side of the panorama here. Can you see this big rock that's just been cut in half? I really thought that this looked great. But then when I'd finished the editing, I looked at this rock and said, like, it's a distraction. It's not all there. So I've cut it in half. Here is my next edit of this panorama. It looks much cleaner because I've cut the rock on the left-hand side out. Also, you can see that there's more rocks on the front here on the left because I've cropped it. The cascades flowing on the foreground is much more defined. So we can see, and it just likes the cascades just opening up in front of us. These are all things that you learn over months or years of editing. This is the second panorama that I took. I didn't realize the first panorama that I hadn't zoomed out to 24mm. I was just in a rush, so I zoomed back out to 24mm and took this panorama here at 24mm, 1/20th of a second, f11, ISO 50. And you might wonder, why didn't I try to get the water a bit smoother? Well, I wanted to show more flowing water in here. I was happy with my long exposures, but I just put the CPL filter on and the 3-stop filter because I want to see the water flowing on the cascades. I wanted to give a bit of expression to this image. And look at this panorama at 24mm compared to the one at 42mm. Can you see now that rock on the left-hand side? It's not protruding. It's part of the image. So I've left it in there. And I've got these massive jagged rocks on the front here. It gives a sense of proportion and go like, wow, this really is the back country. It's sort of rough and rugged. Sure, I don't see as much of the cascades as I'd want, but I was stuck. There was only one small little platform that I could photograph from. As you can see here, I was just stuck to this little area, but I got some great photos. Because I knew that I wouldn't be coming back here, I decided to hedge my bet, and I took a set of 5 images as a HDR panorama. I only used 4 of these images because the 5th image was just overblown and it wasn't going to be of use to me. I know the Z6 II has got a very good dynamic range, but the sky was so bright and my foreground was quite dark that I said, well, I'm going to hedge my bet. If the first two panoramas don't work out, at least I've got the HDR panorama. It's going to take me longer because I've got to merge all the sets of images first, then stitch it up and hope that everything blends together. And these are the 6 sets of 4 images that I took for this HDR panorama. 24 mils, the first image is 1/80th, next is 1/40th, then 1/20th, then 1/10th at f11, ISO 50. So I'm just losing one stop. You can see it's a very dark image, then it goes to very bright, and I was very fortunate that they all blended together to this final panorama. And look at it. It is so nice. And so I was very surprised that this panorama stitched properly, because with 5 frames, with a 1 second delay, I've got around 6 seconds for each frame. And then I've got to count the time that I moved the camera. So it's around 10 seconds per frame. So we're looking close to a minute. And some people say that, why do I still take high dynamic range images with my Z6 II? Well, I'm making it easier for myself because the sky is so bright, my foreground is much darker. Taking multiple exposures is going to increase my dynamic range. When I'm blending it, I'm getting a much wider dynamic range. That is the reason why we take HDR images, to show you the difference between a HDR panorama and a normal single image panorama. Here's the HDR again. Now, here is the non-HDR panorama. Look at the trees, colors and all that. And you see that the HDR panorama has got more depth. The colors are much more even because everything's been exposed properly. My sky's been exposed properly. The trees have been exposed properly. My shadows are exposed properly. I've made it easier for myself. And this is the panorama that I'm going to share on Facebook, on Instagram. I hope this has given you an idea of how to photograph cascades. It's not rocket science. You just need to have an idea of what you want to do. Remember, try different shutter speeds, try different apertures, try different ISO. Look at whether you need a 6-stop filter or a 3-stop filter, or just you need a CPL filter. Sometimes when I go into woodlands where there's trees are overgrown, the creeks and all that, I might just use a CPL filter. I mightn't use a 3-stop or a 6-stop filter because there's no need for it. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a big thumbs up. If you have any questions or feedback, leave it in the description below, and I will see you next time.